Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving into a case that really shook America to its core back in the 1930s, the Scottsboro Boys.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a ton of stuff to dig through: letters, court documents, news articles from back then, even some later writings about it. It's a tough story, no doubt.
It really is.
9 black teenagers falsely accused of something horrible,
Yeah,
stuck in a system that seemed like it wanted them guilty before they even stepped in the courtroom.
absolutely. And what's so powerful about this story is that it unfolds right in the middle of the Great Depression. Think about it. People were desperate, hopping freight trains just to find any work they could get. Tensions were high, and in a climate like that, scapegoats are easy to find.
It's like these 9 young men. They became the perfect targets for all that fear and anger.
Exactly.
And it all started with this fight on a train, March 25, 1931.
Southern Railroad freight train in Alabama.
Right, a Southern Railroad freight train in Alabama. 9 black youths get arrested. At first, it seems like a small thing, and a typical scuffle, kids being kids, riding the rails.
Right.
But then the whole thing takes a dark turn.
Two white women, Ruby Bates and Victoria Price. They were also on that train. They accused these boys of rape.
Wow.
And you have to really understand what that meant in the Jim Crow South. That accusation wasn't just serious. It was like throwing a match on a powder keg.
Oh, yeah.
It fed right into the worst racial prejudices of the time. In an instant, these boys went from being kids on a train to public enemy number one.
Yeah, and for them, just teenagers, to be caught up in something like that.
It's unimaginable.
We're talking about Charlie Weems, Ozzie Powell, Clarence Norris,
Uh-huh.
Andrew and Leroy Wright. They were brothers. Then there's Olin Montgomery, Willie Robertson, Haywood Patterson, and Eugene Williams.
And of those 9, only 4 even knew each other before that day on the train.
Yeah.
The reaction was immediate, and it was terrifying. A mob, all white, whipped up by fear and rage, they surrounded the jail where the boys were being held.
Wow.
The sheriff actually had to call in the National Guard to stop them from lynching these kids right then and there. That's the kind of atmosphere we're talking about. It was intense.
And then you've got the trials that followed. Trials might be too generous a word.
Yeah,
They were a joke. All white juries, all men, and it felt like they had their minds made up before the first word was spoken.
it was a complete mockery of due process. The right to a fair trial. They assigned lawyers to these boys, but they were completely unprepared, barely put up a defense. 8 of the 9 were convicted, sentenced to death.
And these are kids. Leroy Wright, he was the youngest, only 13 at the time. He just barely missed getting the death penalty, too. Hung jury, they couldn't agree on a verdict, but he was still looking at life in prison. It's just hard to fathom the cruelty.
It is, and that's where the International Labor Defense, the ILD, comes in.
Mm.
They saw this case for what it was, plain and simple, a case of racial injustice used to prop up a system that was built to keep Black Americans down.
The ILD, weren't they focused on labor rights and social justice issues?
Right, exactly. They saw the Scottsboro case as this powerful symbol, a chance to show everyone how messed up the American legal system was. They brought attention to it, not just nationally, but internationally. These boys' plight was suddenly on the world stage.
That's right. And you could say the ILD's involvement was a turning point. They organized this huge campaign, got people rallying, raised money for a real defense, and held protests. It's because of them that the case even reached the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and we got some landmark rulings out of that, decisions that changed how the law works in America, even to this day.
Absolutely. 1932, we have Powell v. Alabama. The Supreme Court overturns those original convictions. They said the Scottsboro Boys were denied their 14th Amendment right to a proper lawyer.
Right. That amendment was put in place after the Civil War to guarantee equal protection under the law, specifically designed to protect the rights of freed slaves. The court saw that without a good lawyer, a fair trial is impossible. And for these boys facing such serious charges, with all that prejudice stacked against them, it was even more crucial.
It was a huge victory. But it didn't end there. Alabama was dead set on retrying them, and the fight just kept going, year after year.
Then in '35, another big one, Norris v. Alabama. This time, the Supreme Court tackled the fact that Black people were systematically kept off juries. They said that violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah.
That set a precedent for more fairly chosen juries all over the country.
Another big one for the defense. But even with those wins, the prejudice was still there, all through the retrials. It's unbelievable, but in one of the later trials, Ruby Bates, one of the women who first accused them, she takes back what she said, admits she made the whole thing up.
It's crazy, right? You'd think that would have been enough to clear their names, but it wasn't. The racism was so ingrained and the political pressure was so high that even a recanted accusation couldn't guarantee them justice.
It's like they were trapped. The trials went on, convictions, appeals, retrials, over and over. They were caught in a system that just wouldn't let go, determined to uphold its own twisted idea of justice. It really shows you how deeply prejudice can run, even when all the evidence points the other way.
Absolutely. In this case, it went way beyond the courtroom. I mean, it became part of the American story.
It did.
A powerful symbol of racial injustice.
Yeah, and one of the most impactful ways it left its mark on our culture was through a book, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, absolutely.
Came out in 1960, and it introduced a whole new generation to the complexities of racial prejudice
Yeah.
and how messed up the justice system could be.
Lee drew a lot from the Scottsboro Boys story when she wrote that book.
Yeah.
Tom Robinson, the black man wrongly accused of rape.
Yeah.
His whole ordeal mirrors what these 9 boys went through.
Yeah.
But Lee did something really brilliant. She took this real-life horror, this terrible injustice, and turned it into a story that anyone could connect with. It was moving, it was accessible, and it reached people who maybe wouldn't have known about the Scottsboro case otherwise.
Yeah.
Or maybe wouldn't wanted to read about it if it was just facts and figures.
It's true. By telling it as a story, Lee was able to highlight these universal themes.
Yeah.
Prejudice, scapegoating, the fight for justice, things that go beyond the specifics of one case.
Exactly. To Kill a Mockingbird became like a starting point for talking about race in America.
It did.
It was in schools, book clubs, even turned into a movie.
Yeah.
You could argue that this fictional account did more to raise awareness about racial injustice than all the legal battles put together.
And then there's how the Scottsboro case influenced the civil rights movement, which was gaining momentum in the decades after the trial.
Oh, huge impact. The case was a wake-up call, a reminder of how deeply racism was rooted in American society. It pushed activists and groups like the NAACP to fight harder for equal rights, to put an end to segregation.
So it wasn't just about those 9 boys. It became a symbol of this bigger struggle for equality, dignity, justice for all Americans, no matter their race.
And that brings us to something really significant that happened much later in the story.
You mean the pardons?
Yeah, in 2013, over 80 years after that day on the train, Alabama finally granted posthumous pardons to 3 of the Scottsboro Boys.
Haywood Patterson, Charlie Weems, and Andy Wright.
It's a powerful gesture.
It is, but it's so bittersweet. It's heartbreaking that it took so long. These men never lived to see their names cleared.
That's true. These pardons can't give back the years they lost, the pain they carried. But they do mean something. It's an attempt, even if it's way overdue, to acknowledge the wrong that was done.
Yeah.
To recognize the huge impact this case had on the fight for civil rights in America.
It makes you think about justice,
Yeah.
how it can be delayed, sometimes denied altogether, and even when it comes, it can't erase the past.
It shows us that we can't let up. We can't just rely on court decisions or symbolic gestures.
Right.
We have to actively dismantle the systems that create injustice, build a society where this kind of thing just wouldn't happen.
It's a powerful takeaway from this whole deep dive. We've gone through the legal stuff, the cultural impacts, the pardons, but at the heart of it are 9 individuals whose lives were forever changed by this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
These weren't just names on legal documents or characters in a book. These were real people with hopes, dreams, families, and their lives were shattered, their futures stolen by a system that was stacked against them from the very beginning.
And their experiences, they weren't all the same. Clarence Norris, for example, he was eventually paroled, tried to rebuild his life. He even wrote a book about it.
The last of the Scottsboro Boys.
Right.
But then you have someone like Haywood Patterson, who died in prison. Never knew freedom, never had his name cleared. It's a reminder that even when justice prevails, it can't always undo the damage that's been done.
And it shows us that it's not enough to just fight for legal remedies. We have to tackle the underlying issues, the things that make this kind of injustice possible in the first place. The prejudices, the biases, the systems that keep inequality alive. So as we wrap up our look at the Scottsboro Boys case, it really makes you think, what can we actually learn from all this?
Right.
I mean, how can we take these lessons and use them to make things better, to work towards a future that's more just, more equitable for everyone?
That's the big question, isn't it? For me, one of the biggest takeaways is how important critical thinking is.
Mm.
We can't just accept everything we're told, especially when it reinforces, the same old power structures and prejudices.
We need to question everything.
Exactly.
Dig deeper, look for those hidden biases.
Because they're there.
Like in this case, the Scottsboro Boys, it showed us how racial bias can just infect the whole justice system.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
From the very first accusation.
So the juries, yeah.
To who ends up on the jury. It's a reminder that we have to constantly be on guard against those biases in ourselves and in our institutions.
And this case also showed us the power of people coming together to fight for what's right.
Absolutely.
It got national attention, international attention because of the activists, the lawyers, and just everyday folks who wouldn't let this story be buried.
It shows us that even when things seem impossible, when you're up against these massive forces,
Yeah.
ordinary people can make a difference
Mm-hmm.
by speaking out, demanding justice, holding those in power accountable.
It might be history, the Scottsboro Boys case,
Mm.
but the lessons are still relevant today. It's a story about racial injustice, about how fragile our right to a fair trial can be.
And it's a story about resilience, too.
About the human spirit, yeah.
About how, even in the face of unimaginable hardship, people can hold on to hope.
Hope for a better future, for a world where this kind of thing wouldn't even be possible.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
The details of the case, the impact it had on our culture, those eventual pardons.
Right.
But in the end, the story of the Scottsboro Boys, it's a call to action. It tells us that the fight for justice never ends.
It doesn't. And we all have a part to play in that fight.
So as we finish up, I want to ask you, what really stuck with you from this deep dive? What will you take with you?
How are you going to challenge prejudice in your own community?
How are you going to use your voice to speak up for people who are marginalized, people who are falsely accused?
The Scottsboro Boys story shows us that staying silent isn't an option. We have to be vigilant, we have to speak truth to power, and we can't stop fighting for a world where justice wins.
That's it for us today.
Thanks for listening.
We hope you found this deep dive insightful, thought-provoking, maybe even inspiring. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep up the good fight. Until next time.